Seneca Village. Chances are you've never heard of it. This flourishing African-American settlement was right in the middle of modern-day Central Park, home to a vibrant group of Black property owners. And over the past few decades, historians, New Yorkers, and Seneca descendants have started preserving and sharing this once-forgotten story, like Diane Jones Randall.
I grew up with a father who was very interested in history.
Diane is the daughter of the late Cal Jones, a passionate historian who devoted much of his life to uncovering and sharing the story of Seneca Village.
One of the things that was important to him was understanding where we all came from. There was this population of African-American working class people who were the first significant group of homeowners, of property owners in New York in the mid-1800s.
And it's so hard to believe that it was right here where we are in Central Park.
They built homes, they built schools, they built churches, and they built their own finances. And they were able to do it at a time when that was not an easy thing for Black people.
And it's a beautiful story when you hear of it, but it's also a sad story because I want to ask the question, okay, what?
On behalf of Akuno Sankofa Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope, H-O-P-E, we're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know. Every day, one step at a time, man, we gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Yeah. Sometimes I practice focus, thought, and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate and seeking knowledge, make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
An entire Manhattan village owned by Black people was destroyed to build Central Park. It had 3 churches, a school, and a dozen of homes were demolished. This article is from Heather Gilligan. It was put together in 2017. It says this image is an image of prominent abolitionists Albro Lyons and Mary Joseph Lyons. They were descendants of Seneca Village, New York Public Library. So this image is in the New York Public Library. When Reverend Christopher Rush laid the cornerstone for the first African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in 1853, he placed it in a time capsule, a box that contained a Bible, a hymn book, and copies of 2 New York papers, the Tribune and the Sun. These were mementos for future New Yorkers. Rush, who escaped slavery, became the second ordained bishop of the AME Zion Church, also delivered the church's first sermon. He read in part from the first epistle of Peter and addressed to the oppressed and persecuted, assuring the congregation that although now for a little while you may have to suffer through the various trials, salvation will reward those who kept the faith. But even as he counseled hope, the church was doomed. What Rush didn't know was that the land where the church would stand, part of a thriving African-American community, had been condemned 2 weeks before as part of the plan to create New York Central Park. The community called Seneca Village began in 1825 and eventually spanned from 82nd Street to 89th Street along what is now the western edge of Central Park. By the time it was finally raised in 1857, it had become a refuge for African Americans. Though most were normally free, life was far from pleasant. The population of African Americans living in New York City tripled between abolition and complete emancipation, and the migrants were derided in the press. Mordecai Noah, founder of the New York Enquirer, was especially well known for his attack on African Americans, filming at one point that the free Negroes in this city are a nuisance incomparably greater than 1 million slaves. Most landowners at the time refused to sell to African Americans. A white couple who lived in what was then a distant northern outpost of Manhattan was an exception, subdividing and selling off their land first to the Epiphany Davis and Ariel Williams, 2 prominent members of the New York City African American Society for Mutual Relief, and then to the AME Zion Church. More members of the African American Society, whose purpose was in part to build Black communities, followed suit and purchased land too. Slowly houses were built. Some of them were rather grand, 2-story affairs with barns and stables, and some were modest shacks. The area was eventually anchored by 3 churches and a school. This enlargement shows the location of Seneca Village. It is said that Seneca Village ran along the west side of what will become Central Park between 82nd and 89th Street, and this is from the New York Historical Society. Owning land in Seneca Village meant more than finding a refuge from the slums and violence of Manhattan proper. Buying property meant voting rights, as laws in New York at the time required that voters own at least $250 worth of real estate. Seneca Village probably had a more radical purpose too, as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Prominent abolitionists such as Ariel Williams, later recognized as a conductor on the railroad, owned land and lived there. In fact, the African society so instrumental in founding the village was reputed to have a hidden basement for hiding runaway slaves. And the name of the village itself may have come from the philosophy tract called Seneca's Morals, a book that was popular with abolitionist activists. As Seneca Village was building up, however, support for Central Park grew, driven by some of the same pressures that created the African American enclave. The tip of the island of Manhattan was overflowing with people. The slums were spilling over as more and more immigrants arrived, especially after the Irish potato famine started in 1845. None of these conditions appealed to the well-off New Yorkers who had already started migrating further uptown or out of town by the 1840s. Already, the Lennox family and wealthy New York names owned swaths of land in the vicinity of the Purpose Park. Real estate developers easily foresaw the demand for an exclusive neighborhood bordering parklands. More than 3/4 of the children who lived in Seneca Village attended the color school number 3 in the church's basement. Half of the African Americans who lived there owned their own property, a rate 5 times higher than the city average. And while the village remained mostly black, immigrant whites had started to live in the area as well. They shared resources ranging from a church, All Angels Episcopal, to a midwife, an Irish immigrant who served the entire town.
Seneca Village was home to the largest number of African American property owners in New York before the Civil War. And because those Black men possessed property, they had the ability to vote. Irish and German immigrants moved in too, and white and Black villagers attended church side by side. But when New York City elites wanted to create a park that rivaled those of Europe, they were drawn to the middle of Manhattan.
There was a smear campaign that was created in the media. We've got to get rid of all those people that live in the park that shouldn't be there. They are tramps, squatters, and thieves. This is the kind of language that they used.
In 1853, the city used eminent domain to take control of the land. In all, about 1,600 residents were displaced, including nearly 300 from Seneca Village.
But in 1857, it was all torn down. Even as the church was being built on 86th Street, then painted white, the original settlers fought for their land in court. Andrew Williams was paid nearly what his land was worth after filing an affidavit with the state Supreme Court. Epiphany Davis was not as fortunate, losing hundreds of dollars.
I wanted to try to make connections.
I've been able to find 4 generations, and one of the descendants is Andrew Williams' great-great-great-great-granddaughter, the 4th great-granddaughter, Ariel Williams.
Cal Jones reached out, and I remember that first week of us connecting, we had so many calls and try to help him connect all these missing puzzle pieces and connect my entire family back to Seneca Village.
And she is like the family historian, and she gave me some understanding of everyone in the family. All the men were named Andrew Williams.
So the name Andrew Williams continually gets carried over throughout the entire family, and the only variation is the middle name changes. It's absolutely crazy that they all look alike, and the name is still carried out to this day, and my brother also being named Andrew Williams.
And this is a sign commemorating the site of Seneca Village, Manhattan's first prominent community of African American property owners. It was dedicated in 2001. By 1871, Seneca Village had largely been forgotten. That year, the New York Herald reported that laborers created a new entrance to the park on 85th Street and 8th Avenue, had discovered a coffin enclosing the body of a Negro decomposed beyond recognition. The discovery was a mystery, the paper reported, because these lands were dug up 5 years ago when the trees were planted there and no such coffins were there at the time. That's unlikely, as the site was the graveyard of the AME Zion Church. Researchers from Columbia, CUNY, and the New York Historical Society have been working on excavating the site of Seneca Village since the early 2000s. The work has been slow, with excavation starting in 2011. The only official artifact that remains on the site is a commemorative plaque dedicated in 2001 to the Lost Village. That's like what took place here in Oklahoma with the descendants of the massacre of 1921. Half those people are gone, and they're slow processing on digging up those remains or even handling that case. But I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace and love.